Gone are the days of professional boxing's reign as the king of fighting. We've moved on to a much more interesting and sometimes violent form of entertainment known as MMA. MMA, which stands for mixed martial arts, has punches, kicks, and holds, but also a lot of controversy. Because MMA just recently became such a huge commodity, there have been a few growing pains along the way. We're not exactly here to poke fun at this huge sport and its competitors, we just want to show that even these tough and highly skilled athletes can make mistakes too. These are 10 unexpected MMA moments you weren't supposed to see. Don't step into the octagon just yet. Before we put you in a triangle chokehold, be sure to click and subscribe to our channel. It will definitely feel better than a kick to the face. Kiss of death? 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year! The New Year's holiday is famous for champagne, making resolutions, and of course the midnight kiss. So what happens when you're an MMA fighter scheduled to fight on New Year's Eve? Well, you plant a big kiss on your opponent's lips, of course. At least that's what happened during a fight between Heath Herring and Yoshihiro Nakao. We can't figure out if it was a screwed up intimidation tactic or just romantic feelings coming to a head, but either way it didn't end well. Before any match begins, there's usually a stare down between the opponents. This is usually done to try and get into the head of the other guy. If it works or not is anybody's guess, but if Yoshihiro's plan was to make Heath Herring furious, it certainly worked. Once Heath received the unwanted peck on the lips, he immediately threw a devastating punch to his opponent's face, knocking him out cold. I guess he didn't want the world to see such a masculine athlete get kissed on television. The lesson here should be not to kiss somebody without their consent. First of all, it's wrong to do, and second, you might end up with your teeth knocked into the back of your throat. And that wasn't all. Both men's cornermen also got involved in the dust-up until the fight was stopped. This whole ordeal ended with a rare double disqualification, although it was later changed to a no contest. Not over till it's over. This next event on our list had some commentators saying it was one of the craziest things they'd ever seen in a mixed martial arts bout, and we have got to agree. In addition to being a boneheaded move, it also makes one of the prominent names in the sport come off like a real jerk. Let me explain. During UFC 134, Rousimar Palhares had found an advantage against Dan Miller and was in the process of pummeling him into a pulp. Whether it was cockiness, a bad decision from a blow to the head, or something else, what he did next was a huge mistake. He simply stood up and stopped beating his rival in the ring. He then proceeded to climb the cage and do his patented scream. The only problem? The fight hadn't been stopped and Dan Miller was still able to keep going. You'd think that because he had Dan on the ropes before that it would be easy to finish him up. But no. In fact, Dan must have been motivated by his second chance because he delivered a nasty blow to Rousimar's jaw that nearly knocked him out. When the fight eventually winded down, Rousimar did finally win by unanimous decision, but imagine if that one moment of arrogance had cost him the match altogether. There would have been a lot of explaining to do. If there are any future fighters out there, remember to always fight until you hear the ring of the bell or the ref stops you. Rogan's Fury. The skill, the performance, the show. The big UFC fights are such a spectacle that sometimes it's hard to remember that they're being put on by real people. We all want things to go well when we have to watch an event, but sometimes it doesn't always go that way. And hey, a little bit of out of the ordinary can sometimes be fun. But one announcer didn't find it very fun at all. More on that in a minute. During UFC 109, Melvin Gillard and Ronis Torres were all set for a classic bout when disaster struck. In between rounds, one of the cornermen spilled an entire bag of ice into the ring. Yep, the fight ended up being delayed a bit by a move straight out of a slapstick comedy. But one guy sure wasn't laughing, longtime UFC announcer and comedian Joe Rogan. For a guy used to laughing a lot, he certainly wasn't amused by this. He went on a tirade comparing the man who spilt the ice to the Three Stooges. Remind me never to mess up in front of this guy. The corner man was absolutely roasted, in a display that most people would easily call unprofessional, and that's for all parties involved. Joe should probably leave the brutal takedowns to the fighters. Using his microphone skills to insult a staff member didn't exactly make the UFC look well adjusted and ready for the big stage of pay-per-view. Hello Japan, goodbye win. This next item on the list gives me a serious case of cringe. MMA fighter David Gardner totally pulled a move right out of Rousimar Palhares' playbook. Remember the guy from before who almost got knocked out because he celebrated early? Yeah, about that. When David Gardner was matched up against an intense opponent in Japan, the fight was proving to be a great one. His foe, Shinya Aoki, at one point had got the upper hand. He ended up with Gardner on the ground in a hold for over 4 minutes. That's a place you don't want to be in Japan or in any other country for that matter. After struggling for a while, David finally got an advantage and was able to flip the move around and get on top. So this means it was time for him to rain down punches on Aoki, right? Well, not so fast. Whether he was suffering from getting choked or just forgot where he was for a second, Gardner actually began to wave to the crowd. He mouthed out "Hello Japan" to try to communicate with them for some odd reason. This had to make Shinya Aoki very confused. Can you imagine if you were fighting and your opponent just stopped fighting when he got the upper hand? Whatever the case was, Aoki took advantage of it and nearly immediately grabbed Gardner and put him into a submission. Hey, maybe he was just tired of fighting. The dumps. If you thought that losing an MMA match was the crappiest part of the sport, you might be in for a huge surprise. If you're a child, pooping in your pants can be a devastating and life-changing event that's more embarrassing than anything else. But what happens when you're a full-grown adult, and a professional athlete at that? Well, it puts you on our list of MMA moments you weren't supposed to see, of course. With all the squeezing, punching, and grappling, these bathroom accidents can actually happen fairly often. But we don't usually see them on camera. Former UFC heavyweight Tim Sylvia had one of the more notable appearances of Brown in his shorts during a fight. He later did own up to it and blamed the whole ordeal on stomach issues. What else would it be, Tim? It also happened to Kelvin Randleman and even Yoel Romero. So that means if you train hard your entire life, work out every day, and become a living Hercules, you can still be made to feel like a baby without a moment's notice. We feel a little bit sorry for the guys, but at least they admitted it happened. If it was me, I'd deny. And if that worked, I'd move out of the country. I mean, what would you do? Self-inflicted. If you've never watched a single minute of MMA, and just heard about it for the first time in this video, you would at least know the goal of the entire thing is to get your foe to submit. This can be done by submission, or, of course, the knockout. But trust me, that is a lot easier said than done. In fact, some people not only can't knock out their opponent, they can't even figure out who to hit. During the season finale of the show Ultimate Fighter, Gray Maynard got put in a tough situation. He was matched up against Rob Emerson, and they were having a fight that was taking everything out of them. Maynard was able to get Emerson slammed to the ground, which would normally be a big advantage. But he appeared incredibly dizzy and disoriented afterwards. Gray Maynard had accidentally slammed his own head into the mat with his last move. Not only did he hurt himself, but he also temporarily knocked himself unconscious. Because both fighters were so out of it and unable to keep going, the fight was ruled a no contest. This was an embarrassing stain on the reputation of MMA, as the Ultimate Fighter is a huge promotional tool for the sport. I'd probably knock myself out too if it meant I didn't have to fight any more of those freaks of nature. Unsanctioned participation. If you're like me, you've been watching your favorite sport and felt a strong pull to do the most natural thing possible. Yell at the referees. They can affect the sport so much that they often make an easy target to excuse the poor performance of your favorite player or team. For example, in 2002, the Lakers and Kings playoffs were tainted by allegations that the refs were pulling for the Lakers. But it was eventually revealed that the Kings fans were being sore losers and the Lakers won fair and square. But that's a different sport. Let's get back to MMA. Athletes themselves have also gotten mad at the refs, as is in the case of this selection of our list. During a fight featuring Ade Bachman and Gilbert Yvel actually punched the referee square in the face. Instead of feeling shame for what he did, he actually stayed in the ring after the fight was over. We get that he did what a lot of us dream about pulling off, but we never thought somebody would actually do it. Crazy, right? It was so nuts that some people thought Yvel might have even been on drugs during the fight. That would sure explain a lot. Fainting. The MMA is definitely not for the faint of heart. We repeat, if you're easily startled, get weak at a moment's notice, and become ill fast at the sight of blood, the MMA is not for you. So if you're ever lucky enough to watch MMA live, expect to see a stadium full of fans screaming and cheering for their favorite fighters. Almost nothing can make them shut up and be in shock. Almost nothing. In the case of the match in Australia's Extreme Fighting Championship, that's exactly what happened. In a fight between James Vake and Michael McDaniel, things got a bit strange. It began just like any other fight, punches thrown, submissions attempted. But as it went on, it was clear that Vake was in control and likely headed for the win. But suddenly McDaniel was able to get up after all. There was hope yet, except there really wasn't. All the cheers in the audience stopped when McDaniel fell to the mat without any force from Vake at all. He just simply fainted. Most spectators assumed there was a serious medical issue, maybe even a heart attack or an aneurysm. But that couldn't have been the case, as all fighters are given strict medical clearance before all fights. What had actually happened was that all the chokeholds that had been put on McDaniel had finally caught up with him. He just passed out. They were just severely delayed, creating the totally odd and scary moment. Accident or cheap shot? In one of the most famous MMA photos, Andrew Whitney hits a ring girl directly in the face. He later said it was an accident, and we definitely believe him. But a lot of times fighters make quote-unquote accidents that aren't quite as convincing. Take Paul Daly, for example. At UFC 113, he matched up with a formidable fighter named Koscheck. Now, as with any sport, you go until the buzzer sounds, the bell rings, or you're told to stop. You don't stop early, or in this case, continue afterwards. If you do, you can be hit with disqualification or even fines. Daly was known for his bad temper, so he was feeling especially angry after having been beat by Koscheck in the first 3 rounds. My advice to him would be to channel that anger into, well, legal moves. But what do I know? But that must have not been good enough for Daly, as he threw a wild and dirty punch at Koscheck's face after the match was over. This colossally stupid move ended up getting Daly permanently removed from the UFC. You weren't supposed to see this one, so much so that they threw the guy out of the entire company. Daly said in a response that everything happens for a reason. We agree. The reason is he's a documented dirty fighter. Ring girl danger. This last item on our list takes place at Titan Fight Championship 42, and is a real head-scratcher. We've heard about fighters celebrating early, we've heard about hitting referees, but how about a combination of both? After the Andrew Whitney and Farhad Sharipov fight ended in Whitney's defeat, it would only be natural to see some emotional displays. No, we aren't talking about Sharipov yelling out in joy, or doing a victory dance. We're not talking about his family members crying tears of happiness. We're actually talking about what the loser Andrew Whitney did. Most times you see punches thrown in MMA, you assume they're aiming for another fighter. But in this case, Whitney just wanted to show the world how angry he was with himself that he lost. Like the time I lost a game of Monopoly to my grandma and punched a hole in the wall. Sorry, Grams. Except there was no wall there for Whitney this time. When he turned and punched, he accidentally connected to the face of an unsuspecting ring girl. Now that had to be a total shock. I hope he gave her some of his fight money for a move like that. Luckily, Whitney wasn't punching with full force, so the ring girl wasn't too badly hurt. These guys are well-trained fighting machines, so they really should look where they're throwing those fists around. And my advice is not to throw them into the face of unsuspecting women, or me for that matter. Well, there's our list. Please don't hit us. We weren't trying to embarrass MMA fighters, we swear. Don't tap out yet. Check out the rest of our videos for more fun moments. Until next time.